Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, off the rails. That's where the relationship between Ukraine and the United States at this hour stands. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy clashed with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office for all the world to see. Because this is so important, it may have long-running ramifications for the United States, for Ukraine, for Russia, and possibly all of Europe. We want to share with you an extended exchange of what happened. Please listen.
Do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly
Remember
what
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
President Trump took to social media shortly thereafter, saying in part, quote, he, meaning Zelenskyy, disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. Minutes later, a scheduled joint press conference was canceled, and Zelenskyy left the White House. The two countries were scheduled to sign an agreement today that would give the United States a portion of the profits and long-running access to mining Ukraine's rare earth minerals. This in exchange for continued support in Ukraine's effort against the aggressor power, Russia. That agreement was never signed. Its future remains very much in doubt. I want to start tonight with Ed O'Keefe on the North Lawn of the White House. Ed, what have we learned, if anything, in the hours after Zelenskyy left about how bitter this relationship now stands?
The White House, Major, is now uncertain whether they can get Ukraine and Russia to stop fighting, and there are conversations underway, according to CBS's Jennifer Jacobs, in conversation with some high-level Trump administration officials in the last hour or so, about whether or not the United States should or will pause aid to Ukraine and whether they can continue working with Zelenskyy. It was an incredibly contentious, chaotic, dramatic exchange there in the Oval Office that more than anything seemed to be set off in part by the vice president interjecting and suggesting that Zelenskyy hasn't been grateful and campaigned, in essence, during last year's campaign season by visiting a Pennsylvania-based munitions factory, in essence campaigning for the Biden administration, and more than anything, just not being grateful. Vance himself, of course, a big skeptic and critic of this war, part of the reason Trump picked him as his running mate. The president then, of course, interjecting and telling Zelenskyy he's in trouble, that he needs the United States, that he shouldn't be lecturing them in the Oval Office. And at one point, reporters in the room overheard White House staffers saying to each other, quote, this is going to be big, and that they understood that this clash, that the world was watching, literally. We had dozens of especially European reporters here today in just sheer shock over what was going on in the Oval Office, fighting with each other in such a way that Zelenskyy was then pushed out. We're told he then was moved to the Roosevelt room, as often happens when world leaders come. They go to a separate room in between their meetings. The Trump team determined that the Ukrainian leader had been disrespectful and that there was no way forward today, and they were shocked, frankly, that he wasn't going to sign this minerals agreement. In fact, the American officials thought they'd have more issues with Putin and the Russians ultimately, not with Zelenskyy and his team. But because Zelenskyy was seeking those security guarantees, he appeared unwilling to sign this. And so at some point, the Secretary of State and the White House National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, were sent into the Roosevelt room, and Zelenskyy was trying to say, hey, let's just talk again. Let's reset, let's try to get to a deal. And in essence, Waltz and Rubio told him, you've done yourself no favors today and you can leave. And as the president conveyed over social media, Rubio similarly said, you can come back when you're ready for peace. And so he drove out of here, having canceled a news conference, canceled another public event this afternoon here in Washington. And we're waiting to see how much longer he's here in the United States as the president prepares to spend the weekend in Florida.
And as we've gathered it, part of the backdrop for this is administration frustration, however valid or invalid, but it exists, and it was evident in the clash that the administration believes that Zelenskyy, unwilling to sign a ceasefire without those security guarantees, is being the obstructionist in this. Is that correct?
Yeah, and look, he had a frosty or at times contentious relationship with President Biden as well, right? That we know that he would be aggravated with the Ukrainian leader at times, in part because Zelenskyy knows he has no real security skin in the game, right? They gave up their nuclear weapons back in 1994. They don't have NATO membership. They don't have NATO in Ukraine helping them out. They don't have the United States doing it for that matter. Everyone's sending them things, but nobody is really backing them up otherwise. And so his view has always been, unless you're giving me some kind of guarantee, unless you're joining the fight, I've got to be skeptical of these kinds of agreements, and as he was today. The other thing that may have happened here, and some have observed this, and I think it's a correct one, Zelenskyy normally comes with a translator, and there was one there in the room, but opted to spend his time speaking in English, which is not his first language, obviously. And there's a chance that some of this may have been lost in translation today, or his ability to convey what it was he was trying to say may have been lost, given that he was leaning on English instead of Ukrainian. And the scenes we've seen from in that room, the Ukrainian ambassador with her head in her hand, the Secretary of State sitting stone-faced, concerned about this, and apparently tonight multiple European officials calling top Trump officials, asking to what extent the mineral deal can be salvaged and U.S. commitment to Ukraine can be salvaged. And we'll have to wait and see.
So much up in the air. Ed O'Keefe at the White House for us. Thank you so much. Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy, Ravi Agrawal, a friend of this show, joins me now. Ravi, it's good to see you. How consequential was this moment today?
It was consequential. This is not the meeting that Volodymyr Zelenskyy wanted. It would have been embarrassing for him, embarrassing for Ukrainians to be treated in this way, but also embarrassing for the United States, I think, to have this form of, ill decorum. I mean, diplomacy is meant to be diplomatic. Diplomacy is often conducted behind the scenes. This should not have been on TV. This should not have been seen by billions of people. And in many parts, maybe this turned out the way it did in part because the cameras were rolling and neither side felt like they could back down. You've played clips of it and you've already seen that everyone's voices are raised and they're escalating on top of each other, almost playing to the gallery because they don't want to be seen as weak by either set of audiences in Ukraine or in the United States. But all in all, this does no one in those two countries any good unless you're Vladimir Putin in Russia.
To that point, Ravi, in his social media post immediately after this dust-up, and it was much more than that, dust-up doesn't begin to describe it, the President of the United States said Ukraine, working with the United States, would have an advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage. That's the words of the President of the United States. I want peace. And then, very shortly after that, very significant figures within the Russian government began applauding this quote-unquote smackdown of Zelenskyy. Put those things together for us.
It's not good. If you are Russian or have Russia's best interests in mind, the idea of Trump and Zelenskyy meeting is not a great thing. Because, if they have a frank and honest conversation with the right set of advisors, they're going to talk about Russia being the aggressor in this war. They're going to talk about what needs to be done to stop it. And the realistic sort of honest truth to it is that, the United States does need to help to backstop any peace deal, any ceasefire that is arrived at, and to secure whatever is left agreed upon as Ukraine's territory. So Russia doesn't want this meeting to happen. So the fact that it blows up the way we've seen it blow up is obviously good news for them, but not for anyone else, not for the international order, not for Europeans, not for what America stands for globally. This was disrespectful to all sides, and certainly not for Ukraine. Ed O'Keefe there was talking about how Zelensky is not a native English speaker, and some of what he said may have been lost in translation. I also feel that, this is 3 years into a war. He is, someone who is war weary and, at some level also maybe wasn't ready to play the game in this moment of flattery, the flattery that we've seen other world leaders come, the performative TV aspect playing out in front of the cameras. That didn't happen today.
What do you think Zelensky's options are going forward?
He's going to go home first. He's going to sit down with his advisors, try and assess the extent of damage from this. Look, everything he said and did, it may also be popular in Ukraine. No country wants to see their leader appear to be weak. So the fact that, he said what he said about Putin is something that every Ukrainian knows in their bones, and they will respect him for having said the truth there. They will feel angry at the United States. They will feel scared. So he's going to have to weigh his options. His best options are, of course, in Europe, where over the last few weeks, most leaders have rallied to Ukraine's support, and they're very clear in saying that they need to reorient their investments towards defense to make sure that they support Ukraine, but also that Putin can't go further than Ukraine in the future. But then lastly, Ukraine and the United States, what happens next? If you look at today as pure theatricality, a reality TV presidency playing out on our screens, then there could be twists and turns to come which could surprise us. Maybe they make up. We don't know. But if you look at it purely as something that was substantive, this was a disaster.
Ravi Agrawal, thank you very much, sir.